My name is Alyssa Gregory. I am the district forester for Waldo and Knox County with Maine Forest Service. So I'm your direct contact if you have any forest health concerns, if you'd like a woodlot visit, if you have any concerns about timber harvesting or forestry related activities. I'll have my contact information at the end of this slide, and I'll be around after the presentation if you have any questions. Just wanted to go over a few things about Maine Forest Service in general. We have 3 divisions, and you're going to hear from 2 of them today. The first is forest protection. That's our rangers. We don't have any rangers here today, unfortunately. They are law enforcement. They assist us with timber trespass, timber theft, and also, Sorry, 1 second, guys. Okay, is that working? Sorry, we're just making it so people on Teams can see us. Look like not coming up.
Yeah, starting teams are shared.
There it is. Oh, that's not hearings. Present.
It is that. Gotta hear us up to 10%. Keep going over that pop-up box.
Yeah.
No, keep going.
Over dancing.
Over here, over
Oh.
kid's face. There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, already got.
I work in the woods. I'm sorry.
Yay.
Thank you for the applause for that. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Hopefully, are we good to go now?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So like I was saying, we don't have anyone for forest protection here today, but that's who handles our wildfires, our timber theft, timber trespass. Forest policy and management, you're going to hear from Jana Santerre. She's our community and urban forester. Our district foresters also follow under that umbrella as well. So we help with advice, resources, and also woodland visits for those who have 10 or more forested acres. We also can partner with municipalities if you have questions when developing forest management plans for your green spaces, planting recommendations, things like that. And then also from Forest Health today, we have several folks from Forest Health that I'll let introduce themselves here in a little bit. But the focus of today is going to be on Emerald Ash Borer. That being said, if you have any forest health questions in general, please reach out to your district forester or Forest Health. So exciting news, if you didn't know this today, everyone has a district forester. So if you have woodland or tree questions, you can give us a call or send us an email. I get emails from people with just tree identification questions all the way to wanting to report concerns about timber harvesting. We have the district forester map up on the screen here. That vacant section is now filled with Steve McDonald. He's going to be covering our Down East region. Steve's great. If you have any questions on who your district forester is, you can use the search feature on our website to look for your town, and it'll give you the contact information for your district forester. The purpose of our district foresters is to connect you to woodland resources. So that woodland visit that I talked about, if you have more than 10 forested acres, or if you have a road association or some sort of group or board that altogether you have 10 forested acres, I meet with like homeowner associations not infrequently. We can walk your property and talk about basic woodland stewardship, recommendations on how to make your forest more diverse, healthy, or whatever objectives that you have. We also review what's called a woodland resource action plan. I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. We also lead and assist educational programming, help with events like this, webinars, fairs. I also do school presentations this time of year, especially busy with the kids. But one of my primary focuses is regulating the Natural Resources Protection Act, which is water quality during timber harvesting, and the Forest Practices Act. For those not familiar, that is clear cuts. So one of our primary focuses, like I said, is resources for informed decisions. So all of those wonderful publications that you've seen at fairs, I think we have some here today, you can find those online. If you're looking for something specific, please feel free to reach out to your district forester. I can send you the direct link to it. That includes things like the Forestries of Maine. That's a really popular publication. Also our forest health information, resources related to forest protection, rules and regulations, which if you're interested in rules and regulations, I have copies of the red book that I can give to people, but also connections to organizations and stewardship foresters. I'm going to say during this portion too, if you want the most up-to-date forest health information, please sign up for the Woods Wise Wire. We put out information about quarantines and newly cited forest health issues here in the state. And if you want help signing up for that, just send me an email.
Did you say what it was again, Woods Wise?
The Woods Wide Wire, and I'm sure this will not be the first time you hear that today, but we're not one of those listservs where you get something every second of every day. We send you important information. And if you're interested in more events like this, that's a good place to find it. So I mentioned those woodland resource action plan reviews that the district foresters do. We also have an incentive for these woodland resource action plans. A woodland resource action plan is a forest stewardship plan. That's our branding here in Maine is Woodland Resource Action Plan. It helps landowners define their objectives and come up with a prescription to meet those. So if you have more than 10 forested acres, we can actually help you pay for the plan of a cost, pay for the cost of a plan. We can also help connect you to a licensed stewardship forester. So if you're not yet connected to a stewardship forester, that's something we can help you with. For those in urban areas and for our municipalities joining us today, thanks again for taking time out of your busy workday. We have a cost share available for you too to help pay for plans, but also technical assistance and educational programming through Project Canopy. That is Jan's program, and I'm sure you'll mention it here a little bit more, but I wanted to talk about it along with the wraps. It can really help with long-term community planning. They can also help you decide on what trees to plant, finding the right tree for the right place. And help pay for that. I'm on a committee for the town of Thorndike where I live. We went through Project Canopy to get some planting for our city property. It was super easy. We really liked the results. So can't recommend that enough. Just for the grant category so that you're familiar with it, if this is something that you'd like to pursue in the future. Unfortunately for 2025, that window has closed, but keep your eyes open for 2026.
Actually, we just opened up again.
Oh, we just opened up again. That's great. So yeah, sign up for the Woods Wise Wire so you can get the most up-to-date information. I missed that one. So there are different grant categories. The two main ones here are planting and maintenance and planning and education. So if you'd like to do some tree planting in your urban green spaces or areas that are highly visible to the public, that's something that you can do through Project Canopy. Also buffer plantings, or if you want to enhance those business districts that are very gray and concrete, bring some life back into them. And then also planning and education. So I know Belfast has done a street tree inventory. I believe that was funded through Project Canopy. So if your town or municipality is interested in that, that's something you could pursue. Also long-term planning and then forest management plans. So similar to those woodland resource action plans that I talked about for private landowners, something similar is offered through Project Canopy for municipalities. So you can work with a licensed stewardship forester to have something created for your green spaces, your public forests. Here's my contact information. Like I said, I'll be here after the programming. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out or catch me after today's presentations. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike Parisio. I am one of the forest entomologists of the Division of Forest Health and Monitoring. I work in Augusta, but I go where EAB goes. So yes, I also have statewide responsibilities when it comes to EAB, depending on where you're coming from. So we interact with EAB in several ways. And one of the things, we spend a lot of our time doing is monitoring. So, part of the battle is knowing where EAB is at all times so we can get that information into the hands of the public so they can make management decisions. So, and I'll start off by saying most of our most valuable information on EAB's whereabouts comes from the public. So it's public reports, private citizens, certainly arborists, tree care professionals, people that are really spending a lot of time, dealing with ash and looking at it. We get a lot of valuable calls. So I encourage you to always keep picking up those phones, give us a ring, let us know where you found EAB. Chances are maybe we already know about it, where you are, but maybe we don't. So again, we add a lot of points to our maps based on public reports. So I just wanted to touch briefly on some of the other monitoring programs we engage in. So the first is purple prism trap monitoring. So who here has seen a purple prism trap hanging in a tree? All right, so they're pretty conspicuous, and yeah, hopefully everybody realizes what they are by now. They're not bat traps or bat houses or anything like that. They're for EABs. So yeah, basically they work off of visual attraction, and there is a lure that's inside of them that's kind of a weak mimic of tree chemicals. So unfortunately, EAB doesn't have a really great pheromone lure that we can use for it. So it's kind of a combination. It's not the strongest monitoring tool, but yeah, we have had some success with it. It's been used, nationally throughout the history of EAB in the US and North America, and we are still using it in Maine. So when EAB first showed up, and before EAB showed up, there were many, many hundreds of purple prism traps deployed around the state, and now that EAB has been found, we typically operate anywhere between 150 to 200 traps a year. So I just want to start by walking through, the past year and then what we found so far this year. Again, since EAB's introduction, we've done this survey every year, and we haven't really had a single find up until last year. We've had a lot of years with zeros, which is good. But again, EAB, now that it's showing up on these traps means it's kind of reaching some higher densities. So here's what last year looks like. So last year we wound up running 182 purple prism traps. That's what their distribution looks like. And the reason for that distribution will make a little bit more sense when I get to a map later in this presentation. But you can see, hopefully, those points highlighted in blue, those were our positive traps from last year. So of all the 182, we found EAB in all these locations. So as you can see, two of them are clustered over there, North Andover surplus. That wasn't really a surprise. There's a known infestation in that area, but that's kind of been expanding. So that's kind of a radiating point. The one right in the center there, that's a waterville infestation. So again, this was almost kind of a quality control trap. We know we have a very active infestation there. So we wanted to see, if we're going to pick it up by using these traps. And then, most interesting, we had these 3 finds in northern Maine. So again, when I get to one of these later maps, you'll see how fast EAB is spreading throughout southern and central Maine compared to northern Maine. So northern Maine, even though it was introduced at the same time as southern Maine, EAB has, spread much less. But anyways, we picked up these 3 new towns in northern Maine. And I assume nobody's traveled all the way from northern Maine for this, but I don't have that quarantine map. But that actually resulted in the expansion of the quarantine zone in northern Maine. So, and then let's get to this year. So again, the way this program works, we set up these purple prism traps just before flight season. So when the adult beetles are emerging, and then we check them once in the middle of the season, during peak flight season. That's when we change that lure to, get it a little bit more effective for the rest of the season. And then we also check them, obviously, when we take them down at the end of the season. So that hasn't happened quite yet. We'll be doing that in just a couple weeks here. But here's what we've discovered, in 2025, we're running 201 traps this year. And when we went out to do that mid-season check, we picked up a couple new towns. So again, Mexico and Newry, which again, are in pretty good proximity of, known infestations. And then the interesting one, we did pick one up in Smithfield as well. So again, these will all be checked at the end of the year. Again, we'll see if any more of these traps wind up being positive. Another program we work on is the Girdle Trap Tree program. So that looks a little bit different every year. Last year we had a pretty large program, but basically the way the Girdle Trap Tree program works is EAB, is attracted to ash trees, and it'll take a healthy tree as well as a, tree that's stressed out or declining. They tend to prefer that a little bit. So the Girdle Trap Tree program works by artificially girdling an ash tree to, injure it, induce an injury, and it kind of produces some changes in the chemical signatures of that tree that's more attractive or identifiable to emerald for females that are looking for a place to lay their eggs. So yeah, it's a pretty good tool for low densities. So, we basically scatter those throughout Maine as best we can, especially in areas where we don't know that EAB already exists, because it's pretty much, it's more effective than the purple prism trap program. So as you can see, here's what last year's program looks like. We had 52 trees. So we didn't uncover EAB in any new locations using the girdle trap tree technique in southern and central Maine last year. But again, you can see in northern Maine, those two highlighted dots there, those trees were both positive. So again, after that tree has been out there for the entire season, we'll go out, cut it down, physically peel all the bark off of that tree that's been sitting out there. And then we actually look for evidence of larvae and galleries in it. So you're actually tracking down the larval life stage there, and that happens in the late winter months. So again, we haven't gotten to that point for this year. We have a little bit of a smaller program this year. So we have 12 trees in northern Maine. You can see their distribution. And then we have 14 trees in southern Maine. So again, we don't typically peel these trees until the late fall and throughout the winter. So we'll see if we learn anything else about EAB's distribution in Maine using girdle trap trees this fall. So. One of the new tools, it's not so new anymore, but hopefully folks have maybe seen this, but if you haven't, this is a fun tool to play around with. This is on our website now, maine.gov/EAB right at the top. So, we have a lot of, calls, from people wondering whether EAB exists in their town, a lot of repeat calls, repeat reports. And yes, we know EAB has been there for 5+ years now, and we've had dozens of calls. So this is a tool anybody can use. You go on login and you can actually see, whether a town, your town, if you're interested in it, is positive or negative for EAB, what year it showed up, how it was detected. And you can also see in there the hatching, that's the current extent of the EAB quarantine. So again, you can see whether a town is in or out of the quarantine zone. And I'll talk a little bit more about quarantines, but obviously the major point of quarantines is that no ash material be taken out of that quarantine zone into non-quarantined, which we presume to be non-infested with EAB. So yeah, it's an interactive tool. You can zoom around, you can explore other towns, just give it a quick click. You'll get a pop-up here. So this tells us, okay, we're in Belfast, the ash quarantine. So Belfast is a town within the quarantine zone. EAB was detected, and it was detected just this year, and that came through again, a report from a tree care professional. They were working on somebody's private property that we probably never would have encountered in our day-to-day survey work, that relies mostly on public properties, public roads and stuff like that. And that was phoned in. Did you have a question?
Yeah, real quick. I noticed that it was in 2025, it looks like MDI. And
We'll
it's-
talk about it.
Right, yeah, but it's not part of the quarantine zone. When you find it, when you automatically enter that into, like right now, that last map we showed, it's not quarantine zone.
My next slide is all about that. And it's, yeah, I'll get to that. Everyone's kind of a unique situation. So I'll tell you a little bit about how our methodology works for new detections and how we limit those and stuff like that. But anyways, I encourage folks, I don't know how far people have traveled. As you can see, at the present, Belfast is the only known positive town. We've been looking at Searsport. We haven't found a tree yet right across the line. But yeah, it stands to reason with how hard EAB is to detect. It's probably in some neighboring towns here. It would be very fortunate if these trees found in Belfast were the first trees. But yeah, EAB again is notoriously hard to detect. So a little bit about where that distribution is. The first one found in Belfast was not in the town proper here. It was on the other side of the river right off of one. So associated with kind of a camping property resort there. And then, yeah, more recently, we've actually had trees infested that are reported right in the urban center here, right in town. So yeah, again, in these urban areas or populated areas, EAB can be kind of hard to detect. You have a lot of trees that are suffering from growing in an urban environment that might have some of those same symptoms as EAB. And again, a lot of this stuff is on private property. It's not always visible from the road and stuff. So yeah, we again rely on those public calls to really get us information. So. All right, so let's talk about regulatory stuff then. Yeah, we've already had a question curious about that. So 2025 has been a very busy year for EAB detections. So again, the way EAB works, basically you have exponential growth out there. So, we're going to be adding more and more towns and counties faster and faster. And that's exactly what we're seeing here after a couple of years of relative stability. So as you can see, EAB is really thoroughly infested, the southern part of the state. And at the center of each one of these red dots is a positive point. So that's something we've, physically confirmed. We know there's EAB in this tree or this forest or whatever. So that red dot represents a 3-mile buffer. And based on other people's experiences elsewhere in the country, you know, if you know you have EAB at the center of that point, it's pretty reasonable to expect that even if you can't see it or detect it within that 3 mile buffer zone, you have EAB all throughout it. Again, you know, at these low densities, it can be virtually impossible to detect. Beyond that, those orange dots, that's a 10 mile buffer. So that's kind of the zone in question. You know, there's probably, you know, there's a possibility EAB exists in that 10 mile zone if you have it at the center of that. Again, EAB travels naturally a couple miles a year pretty easily. They're capable flyers. And obviously, yeah, they move further when people help them move. But anyways, you know, that 10 mile zone, you know, that's what we tell people to really pay attention to as far as whether you're, you know, waiting to make a management decision or something like that. Once you are, in that 10 mile zone, that orange zone, like that's when you should, you know, really start to think about acting, whether or not, you know, you're gonna schedule some tree removal, schedule some insecticide treatments, but that's kind of go time, you know, that's the critical point where you still have a little bit of time to make a comfortable decision that's not super rushed. So, again, that's what these colored dots represent on the map there. So, yeah, I guess we'll start, you know, we're in Belfast here, so we'll just get that out of the way. But yes, as we mentioned, you know, we have that detection here in Belfast. So that was the first county detection for Waldo County. So every time a new county is detected, we collect a sample, send it into USDA to get verified and get it into their record book. So that happened. Yeah, first county detection also happened in Bar Harbor this year in Hancock County. So typically when we have a new find, you know, the purpose of the quarantine zone is to prevent things from spreading beyond. So as you can see, like just north there where that Piscataquis label is, like typically we want a 2-town buffer beyond those orange zones. That's kind of our operating thing. So we try to do that every time we revise these quarantines. Now, this quarantine has not been revised in a little while because we've had a lot of new finds, and you know, we tend to wait till the end of the monitoring season. So again, once all those purple prism traps are down, once those girdle trap trees are processed, we have a really good picture for the year of where EAB is, you know, when EAB goes dormant for the winter, and then we make those management decisions. So yeah, because of, you know, the nature of Bar Harbor, that being an island detection on Mount Desert Island there, you know, the decision was made temporarily until we get a bigger picture on the state thing, was to just put Mount Desert Island in quarantine. So yes, there's infested trees there. You know, most of that movement is going onto the islands in terms of, you know, people bringing in, you know, firewood for camping or heating or stuff like that. So, you know, we just don't want any of those ash trees that are going to get removed to make it off of the island. So, you know, we've spoken with some of the tree care companies there. They have capacity they're involved with, you know, ash removals to keep that stuff on the island. So, you know, once it's there, you know, the main thing we can do is just try to limit additional spread. So again, we don't want ash trees being removed and then traveling off the island. So we have a bridge there. We have a choke point. You know, that's kind of an easier one to regulate versus something that's in the middle of the mainland there where stuff can go in every direction. So for the time being, yes, Mount Desert is completely under quarantine, but Greater Hancock County is not. Again, you can see that orange zone extends into Hancock County. We've done a lot of survey work in that area. We haven't found EAB on that side, you know, Trenton or anything like that yet. So again, we're just going to continue to do survey work and wait for, you know, reports to see what we have to do with Hancock County when we again, you know, eventually revise this quarantine. First Somerset County detections, again, you can see that Solon detection right on the edge of the quarantine zone. So we've got that orange zone sticking out into non-quarantine areas. So yeah, that was just a random tree I actually happened to find when I was driving up north to work on another insect. So I went back and confirmed that. So sure enough, EAB is there. So we've got a couple of these new satellite infestations. And again, you know, it kind of raises an interesting regulatory question now with what we've learned this year. You know, some of the past revisions have been a little bit easier to, you know, apply those rules of just slapping in a 2-town buffer. And, you know, originally, when we proposed these quarantine boundaries in blue here, above that Solon infestation. That blue line went all the way across and kind of made like a neat line. But we got some public comment that people wanted to keep it as restricted as possible to prevent a lot of stuff from getting up into those recreational areas. So unfortunately, it's happened already. So, that might be an easy way to revise that, is just to extend that blue line across as is. But again, we have a lot more discussion to have and public comment to have on, what we do about things like Hancock County. And at this point, honestly, again, we've revised this quarantine many times. EAB continues to spread despite it. We've definitely slowed it down, but at this point, given the extent it's in the state, there is always the option, as this will come down to public comment too, whether or not to just repeal these quarantine rules and move on to best management practices instead. Yes.
You said that you've told all the tree companies to keep any wood that's been harvested in Mount Desert Island, on Mount Desert Island. Is that also the advice within the municipalities elsewhere? They have to keep removed trees within?
Yeah, university, statewide quarantine or not, that's always our recommendation. Like, yes, we understand, sometimes trees that are removed have to be moved, but let's move them as the shortest distance possible. That's all part of best management practices. It's just keeping stuff as locally as possible. Once it's removed, where there's no use for it, we advise like chipping trees and blowing them into the woods, leaving logs on the medians and stuff where they can't walk off as firewood and stuff like that, depending on the setting. So again, yeah, the idea is, especially in EAB infested areas, if you're removing ash trees, let the tree care professional deal with it if they're going to, but, don't give it to your friend to take to camp. Don't take it to your camp, all that stuff. That's how these horror stories happen. It's just innocent movement of free firewood and stuff like that. And, EAB survives very well in firewood. If you cut something down, take it out, let it sit for a year, that next year, you're going to get emergence of anything that was already in that tree when you cut it down. It won't continue to produce beetles for more than a year, but certainly in that first year. And, during the winter, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So it's a very real risk. So, but that's all I have for this part of my presentation. So are there any quick questions here if we have time?
The process, Mike, of quarantines, we've gone, in my world, we've gone through a lot of quarantines, and it's always this back and forth. You're gonna allow product to go from one quarantined area through unquarantined areas to another quarantined area.
Yeah.
Is there chatter about that, or nothing you can do about it? And I think you and I had this discussion about, I think Maine's the only state left that has quarantine, everyone else is keeping them all on.
I think some of the upper Midwest states on the very fringe, I can't remember if the Dakotas and Minnesota actually have quarantine or not, but they're kind of in our situation where they're on the outskirts, they're the frontier, so they're doing some of the stuff, but this doesn't mean, these quarantines are kind of to prevent casual movement. We do have formal agreements, like ash logs can go outside of the quarantine to a mill if they have an agreement with the state, with the caveats that, the mill has to understand what they're accepting. The mill has to have a way to deal with that waste properly. Most of this stuff happens during the winter months. When EAB is not active, and the stipulations of those agreements are the receiving party has to destroy all waste material. Slab wood is the biggest concern by the flight season. So before EAB becomes biologically active the next year. So yeah, as far as that transiting a quarantine, so we have this zone here. I don't have it on this map because we're, obviously sitting here talking. The other quarantine zone in northern Maine, is quite far away. And there's not too many instances for ash, particularly where people need to go, but certainly other pests and other situations, and honestly, so when this water bill, detection came on, at that time, it was isolated from everything. We put a little regulatory island on it. So we had to do all sorts of crazy agreements to get stuff moved around. We're not trying to prohibit, the movement of wood, for industry and stuff like that. That stuff's easy to regulate. It's kind of the firewood thing is the really difficult thing where you can't regulate every person, dealing with firewood or moving firewood. So yeah, the big players are very cooperative and they're very easy to work with and very easy to EAB has a very specific biology that can all be used to the advantage of, moving stuff safely and dealing with waste safely. So, again, it's that wood pile that goes and sits for a couple of years, in the back of somebody's camp or something that pumps out some beetles. So, yeah, sir.
You commented on at least processing or getting some of the material chipping.
Mhm.
Comment on that. As far as, is that a good practice as far as kind of managing the insect?
Yeah, I mean, it depends if it's where practical, again, unless you have a really, really large grinder or whatever is chippable, and that's more of a recommendation for like, power companies and roadside stuff, like if that stuff can just stay and not even have to get transport and stuff, chipping into the woods, like is great. The physical process of chipping is pretty good for, destroying any larvae that are in the tree. And then even if it's sitting in a, pile of chips, it's a pretty inhospitable environment for larvae to survive in and stuff like that. So yeah, chips used to be a regulated item, when EAB was federally regulated. But then again, just years of observation stuff says that EAB really does not survive in moving chips. Like, yes, I'm sure it's possible, but the risk is really small. So let's get that off the regulated list. So yeah, ash that's chips, hardwood chips containing ash, no longer regulated in the state of Maine, so that stuff can't move freely. Yeah.
So if I know with Asian longhorn beetle, they had to be chipped to a certain size in order to negate the hatching out of the beetle. Is that the same?
Yeah, I mean, when chips were regulated, they could be deregulated if they were chipped to less than an inch in at least 2 dimensions. So really small, fine stuff. That was the former thing. And then, at this point, there's no real size requirement. Just the realized risk of chipping reduces a lot of that risk, as is already. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't think there's, even the largest chips, grinded material, there's still not too often very large chunks that could support EAB. So. Other questions for me at the moment?
We probably have something on the website that details exactly how to dispose of the wood for people, because I don't see a slide up here.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, our website is full of materials, recommendations and stuff like that. Again, we have some generalized best management practices. Every situation is different, based on what equipment you have, who's doing the removals and stuff like that. But yes, we certainly have recommendations, and for all of that stuff. So our website has a lot of this stuff on it.
Are you gonna be talking about how to get involved in like detection for landowners? My family has a big property on Little Deer Isle with a lot of ashes.
Yep.
Some of them look dead.
Yeah.
And I just wanna, get involved in the detection part.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, honestly, we try to cover most of that monitoring through our state efforts. And, the idea is if we find something, we're getting that information to the landowners so they don't have to do it themselves. The girdle trap tree program is one thing that landowners can do themselves. Certainly, the information again is online on how to do all that stuff. If we have a reasonable number, we can facilitate it. We have kind of a limited capacity, unfortunately, though. So, that's why we have to limit the number of trees we do. So, certainly reach out if you're interested. And we do kind of have to pick and choose if it's going to be included in our state program, whether or not it's a, high risk target, high value information thing. But again, the concept is not that difficult for doing the girdle trap tree yourself if you're so inclined. So
If we're in Little Deer Isle, so that would be Steve McDonald I would contact.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. And I was just gonna say, we're gonna talk about opportunities
Okay.
towards the end, and maybe we can kind of
Okay.
brainstorm.
is Little Deer Isle attached to Big Deer Isle on this thing? Or no?
By a causeway.
By a causeway. I mean, we
The
did have
bridge goes to Little Deer Isle, and then there's a causeway to Deer Isle.
Okay, we did have a girdle trap tree on Deer Isle last year. So we have looked on Deer Isle, if that makes you feel any better.
We've collaborated with our Heritage Trust
Yeah.
to
Oh,
do
okay.
monitoring on,
Yeah.
on Deer Isle. So we have active partners to do some of that monitoring.
Thank you.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, so who really monitors and enforces this quarantine zone? Like, is this more like an honor system or is it?
A lot of it's honor system. I mean, our big you know, our big deal with the quarantine is interstate movement of wood, but I mean, yeah, like Alyssa kind of alluded, like our forest protection, our rangers, you know, they do enforcement of this, so, yeah, I mean, most people are pretty good about it. We do get plenty of public tips, like, hey, I just saw, you know, so-and-so taking a dump truck of wood out of the quarantine zone, it's full of ash, so we'll follow up on that stuff. You know, we don't have, you know, we kind of, yeah, again, rely on the public, we don't have, but
And if there's more, like, say you expand the quarantine zone, is there like notifications? Does it go out? I mean, a lot of this I found out word of mouth, just saying, hey, this area.
I mean, I get this all the time. We just pump out information constantly. It's all on our website, maine.gov/EAB. You can check yourself. But yeah, every time there's an expansion of quarantine, there's always a press release associated with it. We have an EAB specific mailing list you can sign up for with the state. We do monthly conditions reports that goes out to those mailing lists and are posted online. So yeah, if you haven't been on our website, maine.gov/EAB, take a run through. Everything people are looking for is there. And again, we do try to advertise it, and yeah, we can't help if it doesn't always get to everybody, but we do a lot of work for it. Gary.
Yeah, so the other thing, every time there's a quarantine change, it gets mailed out to all arborists, licensed arborists, as well as to all licensed nursery owners. So every time that there's a quarantine change, that's something that I'm involved with and have to do with the state horticulturist. And, you know, we put that out everywhere. And we do hear people saying, well, I didn't know. Well, we can't reach everybody, but we make a big effort to make sure that people know that there's a change.
And to spread the word, if you do get the memo, you know, spread the word.
Yeah.
Mike, let's move on.
All right, that's my time for now. I'll be back again later. So if you have more questions, you can get me then. But thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about biological control of emerald ash borer. Oh, sorry, I'm Colleen Tierling. I'm one of the entomologists at the Maine Forest Service in the entomology lab, forest health and management. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about biological control. Before I talk about the things that we are releasing out into the woods, I do want to mention that woodpeckers, especially the smaller woodpeckers like downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, even smaller things like nuthatches, do a really good job at low levels of emerald ash borer in providing biological control. A woodpecker, or woodpeckers in general, can cause over 90% mortality of emerald ash borer. They can eat over 90% of the emerald ash borer in a tree. Their problem is that they tend to go back to the same tree and hammer it again and again. And a neighboring tree they might not attack at all. But at low levels, they can provide a lot of control. The problem with them is, you can't really count on them because they are generalist predators, and so as emerald ash borer populations rise, they don't keep up. But early on, they do a good job, and they also are a really good way of seeing where emerald ash borer is. So if you can see that the feeding damage, call it blonding. So basically, as they're looking for emerald ash borer to feed on, they flick off the outer bark, and you can see that distinctive pattern. And so that is one thing to keep your eye open for. Look for woodpecker feeding on ash trees. And if you do see that, take a closer look, because in this area, it might well be emerald ash borer. So we have 3 tiny little parasitoids. They're wasps. People freak out when they hear the term wasp, when they think yellow jackets and hornets. Ours are teeny, tiny, like tiny. Some of them, the smallest one is about the size of almost the size of a period at the end of a sentence. It's really tiny. They cannot sting. Their ovipositors are meant for just laying eggs. They can't be used for defense and for stinging. And they are so small and around, they only are around the ash tree. And so they do not have pretty much no chance of becoming a nuisance or pest. And they have also been very extensively tested on a whole wide range of insects, and especially a lot of the insects that are related to emerald ash borer, to see if they will attack our native species. And we do not see any evidence of that. So it is relatively safe. Nothing in biology is ever 100%, but it's relatively safe to release them out into the forest, knowing that there will be very little chance of any kind of inadvertent effects. So one of the species is a larval parasitoid, and you can see it there. I don't know, it's just, oh, that's not. But you can see it up top there. You can see my fingernail down at the bottom of that first picture. That gives you an idea of the size. It's quite small. I've got samples over there on the table, little vials of the 3 parasitoids, if you want to take a look at them afterwards. And this parasite, it scissors its little ovipositor down into the through the bark and lays its eggs on individual emerald ash borer. They're really good at finding individual EAB in trees and laying their eggs right on top of them. And then the eggs hatch and the larvae suck the juices out of the EAB and kill it, producing then another 10 or 15 more new parasitoids. This is the biggest of the parasitoids, and it has a longer ovipositor, which means that it can lay its eggs through thicker bark, and is allowing us to get some control over EAB in some of the larger trees. This one is another one. It is quite a bit smaller, and if you go take a look at it, you'll see it's quite a bit smaller. And as you can see, it has a very short ovipositor. So this one cannot provide control in bigger trees. It can provide control in the upper branches where the bark is much thinner, and it can provide control in younger trees. And again, it will lay its eggs through the bark, and it actually lays its eggs right into the emerald ash borer larvae under the bark. And then all of its eggs hatch inside, and they eat the larvae from the inside out, which is sort of disgusting, but we entomologists, I think that's kind of cool. They can do a really good job of controlling EAB. And both of these 2 parasitoids, the larval parasitoids, can move. And so we have been releasing them in spots throughout the state. And the idea is we can seed these spots and put them in places where they've got lots to feed on, and they can lay lots of eggs, and their populations can build up, and then they can spread. And we do know that they will spread some sites some studies in other sites in other states that have been doing this much longer than we have found that over a few years they moved like 30 miles away. So we do know that they move, and that is the idea, is that eventually we will hopefully seed the whole state, but it will take some time. And then the third one that we release is an egg parasitoid, and so it lays its eggs in the EAB eggs that are on the surface of the bark. And you see that little spot there on the rim of that tiny little cap? That's it right there. So it's really, really tiny. It is about the size of an emerald ash borer egg. And so it doesn't move as fast because it is so small. And also because it's so small, it's really, really hard to find. And so we have a little bit less of a handle on how much it moves, but we do know it will move within a stand of trees. So we have been doing biological control since we couldn't do it the first year because APHIS was doing some sort of catch up and we were not able to get biocontrol that first year. But since 2019, we started doing biological control. And the process is we have to find sites that are suitable for EAB, or for biological control, have to have sites that have EAB in them, because these things will not survive if they don't have EAB to lay their eggs in. And then we submit these sites to APHIS. They will say, yes, that's a good enough site, or no, that's not a good enough site. And then depending on how many parasitoids they're able to rear, they will approve anywhere from 1 to 3 or so sites each year for us to release. And so these are sites where we have been releasing throughout the state. We started down in southern Maine and then up north in Madawaska. And then as the EAB has spread, we have found new sites. And we have also then been looking to recover them. And so after we've been releasing for a couple of years, we go back and we fell trees, we peel the bark off of them, we put them in rearing chambers, we put out traps. We have a lot of ways that we try to find these teeny tiny little insects that are just out in the big woods. And we have found of 10 of the sites that were at a stage where we could start looking for emerald ash or for the parasitoids, we have found them and recovered them at 5 of those sites, which is good. We're not anywhere at the point of saying, yes, we're able to control EAB yet, but we know that they're there. And we know that they've survived for at least a couple of years. And we will continue to go back and do some monitoring. Certainly in some of our neighboring sites, or neighboring states like New Hampshire, where they're doing similar things, they have found the parasitoids, recovered them from most of the sites where they release them. And so we are hopeful for that as well. The caveat is north, where there is a 2-year life cycle because it's colder and the growing season is shorter. So the EAB has a 2-year life cycle. And some years there's lots for these parasitoids to eat, lots of that right life stage. Other years there's very few. And so we may have more trouble getting them established up north, but down south we should have no problem at all.
Where are these parasitoids native to?
They are native to Asia, to China. And because that's where emerald ash borer comes from. So we have to find a parasitoid there that will come back here. There are some of our native parasitoids, native to North America, native to Maine, that do occasionally attack EAB, but not in a level that would provide control. If you go to China, you can see that some of these parasitoids parasitize like 90% of EAB. Yes.
Do chemical controls have a negative, positive, or no effect?
I will get to that in a minute because that's a very good question, integrating the control. So yes, okay. So biological control of EAB is not a silver bullet in any way, shape, or form. It will not save the trees that are standing now. EAB is out there by the millions. We are releasing thousands of these things a year. And that's a lot, given how difficult they are to rear. But there's just not enough of them to keep up with the millions of EAB that are out there. So the thought is that when that first flush of EAB, that first wave of EAB comes through, and most of the ash trees die, EAB population, will crash. And then we'll end up at some sort of low level, attacking trees as they start to mature. The young trees that are growing up, when they get to the point where they can be attacked by EAB, populations will rise a little bit, but it's going to be at a relatively low level. And so by releasing our parasitoids, when there's lots of EAB out there, there's lots for them to feed on, lots of them. They lay as many eggs as they want because there's no shortage of hosts. They don't have to hunt very hard to find places to lay their eggs, find EAB to lay their eggs in. And so their population is growing during this period where we've just released them and there's lots of EAB. Then when EAB crashes, that's when these parasitoids seem to come into their own, because that ratio of parasitoid to prey is a little bit more, evened out a bit.
So is there anywhere in the world, like China, for instance, where there's actually a balance achieved and now they have action?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so in China, part of the reason that the EAB is not a problem is that their ash trees are resistant.
Okay.
But part of it is also this biological control. And so that's why we choose these ones that are commonly, they attack EAB in China, but they're also very, very specialist and they only attack EAB and not anything else. Then we bring them here, we test them against a whole bunch of other species and say, would you rather die than attack another species? And if that's the case, then maybe that's a good candidate for biological. So we're pretty stringent about what we release into the forest. So the biological control is not going to save the big trees that are standing out there now. Although there is evidence that it slows down the death of those trees, but it's not likely to save them just in and of itself. But it should protect those young trees that are growing up, the next generation trees, because by that time, by the time they grow up, the EAB population will be down and that the parasitic population will be up, and there is evidence in other states that those young trees are being protected. And as I said, hopefully they will spread throughout the state. We're seeding as many places as we can. And in those areas where we are releasing biological control, the ash trees are going to come back much sooner because they will be protected, but eventually, hopefully, they will spread throughout the state. We may need to help replant ash trees, and that's why we've been collecting seed. And then you were asking about chemical control. So yes, chemical control and biological control can be used together. If you treat trees with like you inject trees so that EAB is not in those trees, the parasitoids just aren't going to go there and aren't going to be looking for EAB in those trees. And so we are actually doing a research project with APHIS where we are releasing biological control and then we are treating trees for a short term every 3 years and then for a longer term every 3 years until the population of EAB crashes and the population of parasitoids is well established. And then we'll stop treatment. And the idea is that we can maybe save those mature trees, which biocontrol alone couldn't. But if we can treat some of those trees for a certain period of time, not every tree, because if we treat every tree, there's nothing for the parasitoids to eat. But if we save some of those trees, then there is evidence in other states and in an urban research program that shows that the biocontrol alone can keep those trees alive. So we have just started that this year, this research project, and we're hoping we're cooperating with university, we're cooperating with APHIS, and it will be interesting to see if we can keep those trees alive. But it's looking promising. So we are looking for biological control sites in this area. This is an outlier area where we haven't found EAB before. And as soon as possible, I'd like to get biocontrol out in this area. But we need to find sites that have enough ash and that have EAB so we can release them. So the official word is that we need about 40 acres of ash. That is at least 25% ash. These protocols were developed in the Midwest where they do have giant stands of ash. We tend to not have that in Maine. So we're looking for at least a couple of acres with about 25% ash or more. And if there is sort of connectivity with other ash, so that, if there's scattered ash throughout the forest, so that if we release biocontrol in the small stand, then they can follow the EAB out to other areas. Because we don't want to just protect one little stand of ash. We want it to spread. It can be on private land or it could be on public land. This is not one of those that it has to be on public land in order to get government help. So because this is sort of good for the whole state, a lot of our people are private woodlot owners. It doesn't need to be a forested site. It can't really be an urban site. And we need to have some degree of commitment that it will remain forested. You're not going to cut down all your trees and put in a subdivision or something like that. And also people need to be willing to let most of those trees die, because unless you treat with pesticides, most of those big standing trees will eventually die and fall down. But as they are dying, they are producing more and more of these parasitoids because there's lots of EAB in those trees. And so we release parasitoids for 2 summers, and then we monitor for another couple of years. And then biocontrol should be established in that area. So we're looking for sites in this area. If you have land or you manage land that you think might work, contact foresthealth@maine.gov and I can come out and take a look at these sites. And then even if you don't have EAB yet, if you're still 10 miles away, we will probably have you put in a girdle trap tree. And then just give me 1 second and then I'll get to some questions. we'll put in girdle trap trees so that the moment EAB comes to your property, then we can start releasing biological control. So I think that is it for me. And so, yes, there are questions.
Are you also, is it only around here, or how about near Newry?
Yeah, anywhere that, there's actually a whole lot of these outlier infestations, I'm definitely desperately looking for sites. So if you are anywhere near a
Yeah, I
site,
was thinking of a land trust.
yeah, absolutely.
We were talking about AGES. Can you tell us what that is?
Sorry, yeah, animal plant health inspection services, yes. So they are the ones that do quarantines, and they are also, they do biological control hearings. So they've got this giant lab where they release all these, or they hear all these biocontrol agents.
Restaurants don't have any impact on things like, in your yard, none of that.
No.
Solely rely on the EAB.
It's only EAB. They don't even attack species that are in the same genus as EAB. So very, very closely related. They would have no effect at all on any other species, anything that's, not a EAB.
I was wondering, could you see a resurgence and exponential growth of EAB kind of like that initial crash when the parasitoids population kind of lowers with EAB?
Yes, not to the same effect. So right now there's a ton of big mature ash trees. A lot of them are going to die. Some of them are going to be partially resistant, and some of them will be maybe quite resistant, or at least less susceptible. Those are ones that we hope to use for getting genetic material from them and using them to do some breeding, because we do know that each generation of resistance grows. But that there will be a big, this big wave that will come through when most of those trees that are susceptible die. There'll be a lot of small stuff that don't hold, don't support a large number. So most of the population will be quite low. We're not going to get another big influx, but it will rise and fall a little bit. And that's when the biological control should come into its own. Oh, yes, sir.
Do you know what in Manchurian ash, the ash in China, makes them resistant to EAB?
There are different things. There's some that are just less attractive to EAB. Say like white ash is less attractive to EAB than our black ash is, or brown ash. And so that's part of it. Another part is just being able to pitch out or kill EAB that do attack it. And our black ash is actually very closely related to Manchurian ash. And it kills a lot of the EAB that attack it. You just see, you start to see a gallery, and then it just stops. It kills them. But the problem with our black ash is when it does that, it tends to wall off and kills all of the tissue around that EAB. And so it's the tree's own super sensitive reaction that actually kills the tree. So, each EAB, instead of just, eating a little bit of a cadmium, has this big walled off area around it, and you get enough of those walled off areas and the tree is girdled. So, those are some of the things that are involved. I don't know all of the work that has been done, but definitely there is work that is being done as to what resistance looks like. And there's a lot of different types of reduced susceptibility, maybe not true resistance. And so that's why the breeding program is really important, because you can get 2 or 3 different things that make it less susceptible.
I think one more question and.
Okay.
Are there any breeding programs kind of similar to like American chestnut blight or Dutch-elm disease?
Yeah, yes. So there's something, I don't know if any of you have been talking about, there's something called the Lingering Act Program, and where as EAB comes through and trees start to die, then we start to, we look for plots of ash and watch for trees that look better when all their neighbors are dead. And then those trees will definitely be used for breeding.
But that process is decades or generations.
Yes, definitely. But but it will be part of an integrated response that will dash for.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the name of the program.
It's called MOMA, monitoring something ash. If you just look up lingering ash, you should be able to find
Say that.
lingering ash, because they're lingering after the others have died. But yes, definitely the APCOG, the university are doing a lot of seed saving, and they are working with that. But I need to go because other people have.
Program. Amy's gonna get me set up here. While she's doing that, I know if we introduce other people in the room that are here with us from the Department of Ag Conservation and Forestry. We've got Karen Paluzzi right here. She wants to raise her hand. Shy. She's with the Division of Animal and Plant Health and works with our CAPS program. If you haven't picked up on it yet, we love acronyms in any government agency, but I find that you've got particular acronyms.
It basically starts looking for things before anyone has heard of them. So I had been looking for animal dashboard for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years until I got here. And then the Forest Service gets to deal with it.
Yes, we have great relationships. And then we've got Gary Fish back here, also with the Division of Animal and Plant Health, state horticulturist. Many of you in the room, I'm sure, have worked with Gary over his many years with our agency. Jared Gregory, did you introduce Jared? So Jared Gregory is another one of our district foresters. He covers the
Lincoln County and about half of Kennebec County, basically east of Shore.
and anybody else in the front.
We got Lou back.
Oh, Lou. Introduce yourself, please.
This is Oscar, I'm the District 2 Pesticides Inspector. Well, that's for District 2. Oh, I'm here to audit the course and also after the presentation is done, you know, the beginning education credit. You get 1 credit if you're a fellow licensed applicator. And if you have any questions about pesticides, and pesticide usage, and labels, or anything, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Yeah, and again, if you walked in late, we do have assignment sheets set aside for forester credits and for pesticide credits. And then I don't want to miss Jeff Harriman. He wants to be missed, but if it wasn't for the work of FIA crew, which is our forest inventory and analysis group, we would not have the immense understanding that we do have of our forests in the state of Maine, and Jeff is the leader of that program. So thinking he's got me set up. And I did. Is it going to scroll normal? Okay, so forgive me, I'm going to refer to my notes. My name is Jan Santerre. I know a lot of you in the room, but not everybody, of course. So I run the State Urban and Community Forestry Program called Project Canopy. Among the many things that I work on is helping to deliver resources that we have at the state level to the municipalities, to other eligible organizations in the state to manage your urban and community forests. And part of that equation now is, of course, managing the forests that are infected by EAB. So I'm going to just talk about management planning at the municipal level and what communities in Maine are doing. And I am going to refer to my notes. Just ponying on to what Alyssa said a little bit at the beginning, the Maine Forest Service has these 3 divisions. I work within the Forest Policy and Management Division. Our purview is diverse, but the primary focus of our work is on helping landowners and land managers to make good decisions about their lands. And that includes municipal land managers. So we're here to talk about EAB. And as Karen said, we've been talking about EAB for 25 years. So we're blue in the face sometimes. It feels kind of discouraging to see the march of the beetle throughout our state. We have, we communicate regularly, with all of you, and, now we're dealing with, trying to communicate what you can do as the beetle, makes it into our backyards. So management. I always say this, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So the first thing to do with any municipal urban forestry management program is to conduct an inventory of your trees. And just kind of stepping back a little bit from that, every Maine community is going to have to deal with this at some point. We're here in Belfast, where you're going to have to deal with it sooner rather than later. We still do have holdouts within the state where we don't have EAB yet that we know of. You may have a little bit of time to play with, but eventually everybody is going to have to deal with this. And every community is going to be encouraged to determine what their individual management strategy is for their street trees as well as for their public forests. As with any pest, there is the ability to choose to do nothing. But it's important to recognize that even when a community chooses to do nothing proactive, nothing in advance of the pest, the community will still have the responsibility of managing those public trees for public safety purposes when they succumb to EAB. So you will not be spared. Communities can also choose to remove all the ash trees that potentially pose a risk to public safety and ideally replant those trees with non-host species. While this eliminates the risk from EAB induced ash mortality, the initial cost is extremely high and will significantly alter your community landscape for the next couple of decades. Anybody that lived through the Dutch elm disease certainly knows what that looks like. Ideally, and this is what we promote, that communities will choose to manage somewhere more in the middle, removing ash already in decline and retaining healthy trees to potentially treat using some of the approved methods. And with this selective approach, active monitoring efforts, of course, always critical to guide ongoing management decisions. So this is just, a few of the things that you want to consider. I'll go into a little bit more detail in what we recommend every community include in their management plans. Just a little bit of background about what the ash resource looks like in Maine. These graphs are relating to trees in our forests. Again, the work that Jeff's crew does that we pull out of our FIA data. In Maine's woods, we know that ash is not as abundant as species such as oak or maple, though locally it can be very, very abundant. On average, roughly 2 to 4% of all trees in Maine are ash. And while that may not seem statistically like a large amount, it still equates to hundreds of millions of ash within our forests. Keep in mind that we have close to 3 million acres of forests in the state. Most of those trees are in smaller size lots. In cities and towns, our streets and parks, that composition can be very different from what we see in the woods. Locally, some communities may have up to 25% of their street trees that are in ash. That's at least what I've seen in some of the inventories. And again, going back to Dutch elm disease, ash was a very common tree that was chosen for replacement of our elms. So that's why you see some of those locally high numbers. So management plans. These are just a number of things that we recommend to be included in a management plan. You don't have to include everything, but some of them really are critical elements. We do have a sample management plan up on our website. It is in desperate need of updating, but everything is included in there. And I'm going to make it a point to make sure that we do get that updated. So scope, you want to consider in your management plan the area and the land ownerships where the plan applies. Administration, who's in charge of that, implementation and compliance with the plan, what your treatment and removal protocols might be, monitoring efforts, in particular, monitoring beyond potential municipal inputs to include things like campgrounds, nurseries, firewood dealers, that sort of thing, doing monitoring nearby to those places. What's your wood utilization and disposal guidance locally? A communication plan, critical to any type of plan. But how are you going to communicate what you're doing to the public when they're upset that their trees are coming down? And included within that, an education plan, educating your public about what they can and should be doing. You can address how your EAB response is going to address your normal course of work. Communities that have an active management program for their public trees may have to displace some of that work that they would ordinarily do to compensate for what is necessary to take care of the public safety threats, particularly related to EAB. Cooperation, who in your community are you cooperating with across agencies, state agencies, other local organizations, etc. Are you going to deal with private trees? Very important question to ask. You can also provide things like lists of local licensed arborists, pesticide applicators, other types of contractors that might be doing this work. And that is, strictly really for public use. What's your budget? Also a very important thing to consider. What's your tree replacement and care plan going forward? And, those are just a few things. And you locally are going to have other things that you might want to consider.
Is that slide on the website?
These, I don't know about the website, but definitely we can make these available. Dale, I can certainly send you that too. So you've heard about some of the management tools that are available to you. And as Colleen mentioned, we've got research that's going on in woodland situations where we're testing the effectiveness of integrating these management tools, doing targeted ash removal, integrated with biological control and as well insecticide treatments. And again, I try to look at this a little bit on the positive side of things. I'm glad we're not Detroit or wherever it was, Danielle, that it was found initially, 20 plus years ago, because we didn't have these tools. We do now. So we're somewhat fortunate that we've, got 2 decades worth of research and study that we can have in our back pocket to help us manage our trees. So targeted ash removal is going to be part of any community's response. There's no way to escape the fact that you are going to have to take ash trees down. Ash tends to be a bit of a scrubby species in general, I would say. We might have some foresters in the room that would disagree with me, but they can look a little rough. So in your inventory, you want to know what their health is. That's going to be a very strong indicator of whether or not you're going to be able to treat those trees or whether they should be targeted for removal. And it will be a cost balance between how many trees you can treat and how many trees you can.
I think to get to what the recommendations are regarding removing a portion of non-significant public ash trees communities might do, or do you think they should attempt to inject and save all of their street trees, for example?
I'm not going to offer a percentage, Nancy. That really is going to be locally determined, and it's going to be determined by one's budget too. And it's also going to be determined to an extent by what appetite the community might have for doing things like insecticide treatment. Not every community is going to have an appetite for doing that. They may choose to remove trees knowing that they're not going to be able to save them in the long run. But again, that's locally a decision that will have to be.
Done before EAB moves in or the stages, and that will provide some sort of protective measure to the survivors that you want to significant?
From the pest,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let the entomologists in the room answer that question, perhaps, in the Q&A section towards the end.
Not really. We do know that if there's not there are a lot of ash trees around, and people just travel further to lay their eggs. It might have some small effect, but, another possibility might be to wait until trees are invested. And then you cut those trees down and chop them up, those trees can become a bit of a thing. That method of doing that is to girdle trees, ash trees, and then a lot of baby will go there, and then you cut those trees down and those baby die. That's something that can be done to slow down the spread in the early stages of the.
Yeah, at one point, they were utilizing girdle trap as a thing. I don't know how effective that proved to be.
As part of the general integrated management, it can slow the spread, and slow down the death of your remaining ash trees by 5-10 years maybe.
Okay.
You can buy you some time.
That's
A
significant.
lot of discussion, we're gonna have time at the end to talk about what.
Yeah, I'll move quickly through here. So targeted ash removal, those trees that you want to target in your community, I would say, at this point, no community in Maine should hold back on starting that removal process. Because again, we are going to have EAB throughout Maine. So as budget allows, starting to remove those trees that are in the greatest decline now is going to help spread out the impact, particularly to your budget. And as well, something that doesn't get mentioned probably enough in these types of meetings. Once ash is infected by EAB, its composition changes. I'm looking at you, Joe. I mean, I don't know how many EAB brittle trees you may have taken down, but it changes and they become very dangerous. So
It changes very fast.
Yeah.
And the trees are big ones, very dangerous to take down.
yes,
Very unpredictable. Once the tree is completely dead, you gotta need professional thing.
yeah, and it can be very expensive. So you can save yourself a lot by getting ahead of that.
So what's very fast? Nobody has really addressed that,
I can.
My industry been around
No,
10 and 3 weeks.
The way, so in about the first year after death, branches 1/3 or 3 inches start coming down. 2 years, they get up to like 6, 8, falling down in place pretty much directly.
On dead, still days, no wind.
Yep.
And within 3 years, the tree is gonna be collapsed. Once it's not with the asphalt.
Become very brittle after they die. So they're dangerous to find. Yeah. So then it becomes more expensive to remove them. Yeah, very.
I think the takeaway for like a municipality should be waiting until the tree is infected almost makes it too late. It makes it more dangerous and more expensive for arborists to deal with. And it's also too late. Once there's a EAB in the tree, your management options in terms of treatment, your success rate is way down. So if you want a tree, you need a tree or they're in the tree.
Yes.
So waiting costs more.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it does. So again, trees that are already in decline, and because ash is kind of a scrubby species and has other things that bother it, a lot of trees do look like they're in kind of poor health. Focusing on those ones that have, thin canopies already, dead branches, etc., is gonna save.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm not gonna go much into insecticide treatment because Mike is gonna talk about that, but we do have options as far as insecticide treatments go. There are a variety of products, there are a variety of methods of which those products can get into the tree. Aerial applications, there are no aerial applications. And I'll let Mike talk about that and talk about some of the trials that have been done using some of those. This is our go-to resource. This is on the website. It gets updated regularly with new research guidelines into the various different products and formulations, as well as costs. And as much as as we are doing at the state, we're still trying to slow the spread of this. We do still have those internal quarantines to limit the spread. So, keeping your wood local, that's again, part of your plan, part of your wood utilization strategies. Not moving firewood outside the quarantine zone, following those quarantine rules. Harvest timing, if you're a woodlot owner, consider your harvest timing to the winter months when we are not seeing the insects flying. And then just in general, and this applies to woodland owners as well as municipalities, promoting good forest health, diversity of species, and those species being healthy. For woodlot owners, yeah.
I wanted to ask people, how many of you have come up from Massachusetts on 95 or Route 1 and seen the billboards that we had? Good.
Awesome.
Hopefully they help. No way of knowing, but hopefully they help.
Those are new this year, right? Those were new this year?
Those were new this year, yeah. And that's something that Karen,
Yes.
helped with. She did all the work.
You had that you're recommending, forestry remove harvest during the winter. Could it be a recommendation that arborists only remove ash during the winter?
When it comes to other things with urban trees, I would say, the moment is right when you're there. Again, it's going to depend on the municipality when they're doing a lot of times. I mean, cyclical tree work, I think often does happen in the off-season months, particularly here along the coast. Probably most arborists don't want to be working during the busy tourist season roadside doing big tree removals, but that's more, again, a function of limiting the movement of the wood afterwards. In timber harvest, the wood's going to move a lot farther potentially than in arborist work, I hope. But that's where that recommendation comes from.
Does it make it safe once you debark the wood? Is that a safe piece of wood to then transport?
Not simply debarking. I think the recommendations is the outer.
Yeah, the regulations are for it to become unregulated, it has to be true four-sided, lumber mentioned. So EAB exists right below the bark, so any live edge or wane on lumber makes it still a regulated product. If you have a true four-sided or all that up to the outer quarter inch is removed, then you can move that lumber freely. But yeah, the slab wood and the outside logs is the real danger. That's what we really focus on.
And if you're interested as a woodlot owner, we do have forester trainings and landowner trainings as well that would talk about this. I've got this link up here for one document out of the University of Vermont, which is great, which talks about forest management for ash. So I highly recommend taking a look at that. Another great strategy in any municipalities involved in the public. Often the public is going to be your best defense. Mike mentioned, Colleen mentioned, we use all of you to help inform our awareness of where EAB exists across the landscape. And you can use your community members in a similar way. They can help with those initial EAB detections, doing tree surveys, helping with the inventory work. Many things, public education events. It's great to involve the public, and it really is a good PR tool for you too, when you do have to start doing something. So next steps, again, conduct an inventory. That's the first thing that you want to do. It may not be a whole tree, every roadside tree in your community. It might just be for the ash trees, but get that started. Know where your significant ash are particularly, and those that will pose a public safety threat when EAB arrives, and start to form that plan. And then just lastly, I'm gonna skip over the end of this here, and I feel like I'm being a little repetitive. Said I was going to talk about what other Maine towns are doing. And this list of what Maine towns are doing, or towns that are forming management plans, is growing ever so rapidly now. What I know based on projects that we funded through Project Canopy. Street tree composition in these communities, you know, like I said, ranges anywhere from 2 to 3% up to 25% of the public street trees. And all of these communities that are listed here have at least some basis of a management plan that they've started. I should have Belfast on here too, because Belfast has completed their inventory now and starting to do that work as well. Camden, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Camden has an excellent EAB management plan that they're beginning implementation now. Any of these plans that we have on file are available, public information for you to use as examples of informing your own plans as well. So I encourage you to reach out. We don't have those posted on our website. But you can reach out to any of us and we can get you links to those management plans that are out there. And you all are a resource to each other in the room too, to know what your neighbors are doing. So I think that's my last slide for now. So unshare, I think, or I'm just gonna, so.
Nope, middle top, stop sharing. Top.
You need help? Yeah.
Top.
Can you comment at all about what the utilities are up against and doing?
Yeah.
You want to say anything? Just in the room that wants to comment?
Yeah, so Jan and I have known each other for a long time. And we work, so Lucas Tree works for the utilities, that's why she's looking at me. So the utilities approaches, if it's a hazard to the utility, then the utility is going to take care of it. If it's not a hazard to the utility, then it belongs to the homeowner or the municipality. And so the approach is, if we see them and they're in decline and we recognize that it's got an EAB, the utility is a customer, they're going to ask us to take that tree down. We want to answer the question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, we do work closely with our utility partners, some more closely than others. Which utility? Your CMP. We have a great relationship with CMP and, you know, they're trying to stay ahead of it. It's not an easy task, particularly in York County, where EAB is really advancing very quickly, but then even in central Maine and in Watertown. It's very apparent how quickly it's advancing. So they're doing everything that they can and instructing their contract line clearance workers to do everything that they can, again, to protect their resource, which is the utility lines, but in turn that affects us too. Similarly, the State Department of Transportation is a major player in how this goes down in the state, and we do try to work very closely with them as well. And they have a really great education program through their local road center that they have historically conveyed a lot of this information to the local government commissioner. So this did not be new to any community. Questions? We can save them to the end.
Wondering how effective any quarantine is with long environment. Traveling to a facility that has the right to treat them waste. How effective is the quarantine?
I'm sorry, I was sorry. Could you just repeat the whole thing for me? So.
How effective do you think quarantines are when dogs with bar everything are en route to a facility that can treat waste?
I mean, I think, again, log regulation is a lot easier than firewood regulation because fewer pieces of stuff. So like, we're in touch with all the receiving facilities. They know what's going on as well as the shippers. So again, this goes back to that winter comment, you know, if we move stuff in the winter, logs, you know, specifically, EAB is not biologically active, so there's zero chance of it emerging. You know, the whole reason there's strict movement is like, you could have, you know, logs in the summer months rolling down the highway, yields could be popping out as you're rolling down the thing. So again, we do that stuff in the winter where EAB is guaranteed to be biologically dormant. And yeah, they have to have an agreement in place to destroy that waste material properly, whether it's through chipping, a lot of them just incinerate it. A lot of these facilities are burning, wood fuels on site for some of their other infrastructure, so it works really well. So it's not perfect.
You're right, the ash trees come into this state from other states year round. They don't only come into this state between October and April.
There is no movement without an agreement into the state. Now that the southern end is regulated, stuff can move into that regulated zone, but again, those regulated zones are considered already contaminated. There's no movement from in-state or out-of-state into non-regulated areas in Maine. So, yeah, we get a lot of calls. Yeah, we get a lot of calls about. We do get a lot of calls about log loads rolling in the summer and stuff, but they're going to regulated areas, so. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, forgive me, this is not my presentation, so I'm probably gonna do a bunch of reading, but Gabe LeMay is another one of our entomologists. And Gabe has gotten very involved in insecticide treatments for EAB. So one of the projects the state is working on is, selected clusters of trees to preserve for genetic material, for seed source in the woods and stuff. So again, to have some, tools in the toolbox for the aftermath for us, so we won't totally be missing ash from the landscape. So yeah, I'll breeze through this because I think we're a little bit behind schedule. But again, a lot of this research is coming out of places like the Midwest, that have been dealing with EAB for 15 years longer than us or better. So again, we really promote people getting on the website. There's some really nice documentation, like sit down. It's, it's complicated information, read that stuff. The insecticide guide on the last page of this slide that's on our website lays stuff out really nice. So, spend some time with it. But anyways, yes, basically, EAB is a rolling, wave that can lead to about 100% mortality. So we're trying all sorts of techniques to preserve whatever we can. And so pretty early on with EAB, existing insecticides were tried against EAB and some other ones were developed. So, there's been a couple decades of that work, evaluating these. So yeah, chemical protection has certainly become a tool in the toolbox as far as, either using it on its own, but again, integrating it with a lot of other things. So yeah, as Jan alluded to, the options are always do nothing, tree removals, and now insecticide treatments is one of them. But, we'll talk a little bit about how those play together. You can use insecticides to keep trees alive, healthy until they can be removed, to space out, those removal windows and stuff. So, insecticides are not always used just for preserving trees, but sometimes just keeping them safe until an arborist can remove them. So, okay, so when should I consider treatment? So again, we've talked a little bit about this. EAB is notoriously hard to detect. Again, on a regulatory map, you have that orange bubble, that 10-mile zone. So if EAB is within your 10-mile radius, that's the time to go. As far as individual tree health, you can be looking at a tree that is infested with EAB and not know it. And that's kind of one of the key components is that visual component. So once EAB is really active in a tree, you're going to start to get things like dieback from the upper canopy and stuff. So we're setting a threshold here at 50% being the absolute latest. So if you have 50% of dieback from the canopy, that's kind of your cutoff. You're not going to, it makes no sense to invest in treating that tree, because the tree has to be healthy enough to really pull the chemicals up into the tree itself and the canopy to, again, expose EAB to it. So that's really what you need. You need that bottom line health, and 50% might be generous. Obviously, if you're going to treat and you're within the, recommended treatment zone, you can start a little earlier than that, but that's the absolute deadline. So yes, again, treating too early, there's no reason to necessarily do that. Preventative use of insecticides is not really a good, practice, part of IPM or anything like that. So, that's right. It's really important to pay attention to those locations where EAB is in the state. So, you know, whether you're in an area where you're okay to start going, if you are gonna be treating trees, or whether you still have a little bit more time to plan and make sure you're ready, so. So yeah, again, you know, there's been a variety of chemicals tried for EAB and a variety of application methods. So there's a lot of other things that utilize things like soil drenches. So again, this is broadcast pouring a chemical on the root zone around a tree with the hopes that those roots take up the chemical and, you know, transport it into the tree itself. So obviously, one of the cons of soil drenches, you know, that is not limited just to the tree itself. You're obviously affecting soil potentially. There's certainly other plants that are growing in that root zone that might take up chemicals, you know, and this has especially been a concern, you know, of any flowering plants growing in the root zones, you know, as far as exposing pollinators to chemicals when they don't need to be. Bark spray, a little bit more contained. So instead of dumping chemicals on the ground, you're actually applying them to the trunk of a tree where they can be absorbed through it into the vascular system and then taken up to the tree. And then probably, you know, most exciting in recent times is that trunk injection techniques and technologies have really advanced. So this involves, you know, drilling holes into the tree itself. You put a little applicator port in there, and then you're physically injecting chemicals into the tree directly. Again, doesn't come through the soil into the roots, doesn't come through the bark where it can be exposed to the outdoor environment. So, you know, as far as containment of chemicals, you know, trunk injection is kind of the best technique out there at present. So, and again, they're developing more and more of these different, you know, trunk injection techniques and stuff. So it does come with some pretty sophisticated equipment, you know, at the time and present. So yeah, you're going to require, you know, a licensed pesticide applicator that knows how to use this technique and has the equipment. So at present, but they're also working on some pretty low tech, you know, things that I don't know if they'll ever truly get into the homeowner's hands per se, but they'll be a little bit more accessible for more, you know, licensed pesticide applicators and stuff like that. So those are the methods. Here are, you know, kind of the current you know, insecticide options. So the first one's imidacloprid. So folks are probably familiar with that. That's been in the news a lot. So it's a neonicotinoid. So it's actually recently become more restricted in Maine. And again, the application for that, there's a couple ways to apply it, but one of the things that was commonly done was a soil drench of imidacloprid, which again, neonicotinoids being one of the things that affect pollinators the worst. So really not a favorable technique. We're not sure how many people are still kind of using this technique or not. It's hard to get that information, believe it or not. So we hope folks are kind of transitioning into things like injections to keep that that pesticide exposure, you know, off of the soil and other flowering plants. But again, you know, one of the questions you have to ask yourself for a treatment program is how often am I going to be doing this, you know, which has, you know, associated costs and stuff like that. So imidacloprid typically affords about 1 year of protection. So you're going to be treating annually, you know, biannually at best, but, you know, you kind of assume annually. And then, as you can see there, it's good for small and medium trees, not so much the larger trees. Dinoteffurin, another chemical. Advantages here, you know, it has a faster uptake than other things, short residual. Again, that's going to be an annual treatment, and that can be applied as a bark spray, soil drench, or an injection. Azadirachtin, so this is a neem-derived organic chemical. It's applied through trunk injection. There's very variable, you know, information and data on this as for its efficacy. But again, it's kind of a short-term product where you're going to be retreating annually. So, and then finally, emamectin benzoate is kind of, you know, the chemical that's proven to be the most consistent, and especially when we're dealing with larger trees and stuff. So again, trunk injection, so fully contained direct application of chemical into the tree with limited contact to the environment. And the big advantage of imidacloprid or emamectin benzoate rather is, you know, the duration. So, you know, most people are treating on a 3-year cycle for this. So you're only ever treating 3 year. And, you know, that's important for trunk injections because you actually have to drill ports into the tree. And so, you know, if you're doing an annual injection, you're going to do a lot of damage. You know, in a 3-year time, those trees can actually recover quite well. They'll, you know, callus over those ports and absorb them and stuff. So you do have to kind of think about the long-term goals there, whether you're just treating this tree for a little bit until you remove it, or whether you're really trying to keep it alive forever, that 3-year, application is really an advantage for that. So, do you want to get into this now or afterwards?
Same questions to, I think we're a little
I just wondered whether the slide on the as a direction didn't mention that it's on the right. Seems like that should be on that slide.
There's another slide here, but it's not there. It's not my presentation. Anyways.
It's on the right in it.
He mentioned that it was organic.
Yep.
He did mention that it was organic.
Yeah.
We can have a whole discussion about pros and cons and, everybody is entitled to, select what they want. But yeah, these are just, this is what's out there. So again, dino and imidacloprid, again, neonicotinoids. So these have really fallen out of favor, just from a public, perspective, but also from a regulatory standpoint. So again, we're not sure how many people are still keeping this in their arsenal. We don't hear about it a lot as being used as a viable method for EAB protection still. But yeah, it might still be used out there. And again, it can be, used with some more restrictions and some variances and permits and stuff like that. So let's see, azadirachtin. So yes, botanically derived from neem seed, injected directly into the trunk. Again, there's limited data on how effective it is. There's some information that it's not acutely toxic, but it did reduce some fecundity and, reproductive rates for EAB. So yeah, depending on the pressure, you can get 2 years out of this if you have moderate pressure, but annual treatments are recommended when you do get into higher densities. Amamectin benzoate, again, this is also, derived from, a natural source. It's soil bacterium derived, injected. We're finding, based on, track record and what people are using, it is one of the most effective things out there. Again, you get that benefit of the 2 to 3 year residual in there. So you're not treating every year, which can help, again, reduce impact to the tree and costs. Kind of become the preferred choice for high value ash trees in landscapes, parks, and street planning. So again, this is an important tool to consider in urban, residential settings. And then as far as treatment window, you have a pretty good one. You do want to make sure you get this done earlier in the year because those spring treatments are more effective than stuff into the fall. And I don't think we do any injections past September, and we try to get them as closer to the spring season as possible. All right, so risks, again, this varies on the product you're using. There's always water quality and aquatic organisms risks. So, soil applications in particular are of high concern for leaching in the soil that eventually, may make itself into surface water, groundwater, or, through the active runoff, make it into water bodies themselves. Pollinators. So fortunately, ash, it's wind pollinated. It's not a true, flowering plant in that sense where you have lots of macro pollinators on ash trees all the time. But again, yeah, neonicotinoids, certainly a huge concern for pollinators themselves. And again, that's why they've kind of fallen out of favor. And none of these, chemicals are without hazards to other insects that are utilizing ash. We do have a lot of native species that do utilize ash, but again, if you're going to go this route, there are some trade-offs and stuff. So whether or not, that's an acceptable, trade-off for you, that's again, a personal decision. Nobody's forcing you to go the insecticide route. And then, yeah, we get questions about woodpeckers. So yeah, a lot of the host location things for parasitoids and woodpeckers are based on the larvae being alive below the bark, and accessing them through vibrations and stuff like that. So none of the studies have shown that woodpeckers spend a lot of time feeding on, larvae that have been killed by insecticides. And most of the mortality achieved from insecticides is actually geared towards the adults themselves feeding, when EAB emerges as an adult, they fly to the canopy where they spend a couple of weeks maturing, reproductively, where they're feeding on the leaves of the ash tree. And that's where that chemical exposure comes, as those adults consume the leaves and before they can reproduce their toast. So that's most of the idea. It's not so much larval. And then, yeah, again, I just want to point out, really, really nice, especially that one, the insecticide options. I don't know if we have a copy here, but this is available online. a lot of research from Ohio State, places in the Midwest, that have really diving into these and give a nice little breakdown of all the chemical things. We do have a one pager, from the Maine Forest Service too, we're working on updating. But then, yeah, we had some questions about these other things, there's all sorts of recommendations there. So, we want everybody to take some time, read through this stuff. Anything you don't understand or have more questions about, send us a note at Forest Health and, we'll have a conversation about it. So question time, let's go. Yes, certainly, the whole idea is that it does get into the leaves, so it is present. Huh? Mm-hmm.
It's not. Things like that.
I mean, from all the studies and the literature out there, there's no, evidence presented on significant effects of that. Every chemical is present in the environment once you put it out into the environment. So if you have a zero tolerance for chemical residues, then don't use it.
Whether or not it's safe for kids and parents to play in it. I'm asking the question, has that happened?
Let me take that.
Okay.
All right, so some of you know that I was the manager of pesticide programs for 28 years out in the state horticulturist. So any of these insecticides, I don't call them chemicals because everything's chemical. So they are registered by the Environmental Protection Agency and the State of Maine Board of Pesticides Control. In order to be registered, they need to be able to be found to have pretty much an insignificant risk to humans especially, but also other non-target organisms. So looking at leaf litter that might contain emamectin benzoate, it's going to be at a level where it's not going to impact humans or wildlife or anything like that. It might have levels that might be enough to kill a decomposer or something like that, but not at a significant level. Yes, there's going to be always negative outcomes for anything that you do, whether it be an insecticide application or cutting the tree down. When you cut the tree down, you're removing a piece of biological material that is home to certain things, you're killing things. And so every action that you take is going to have some risk. And you need to then decide what's the benefit, what's the risk, is the benefit greater than the risk or not? And you then can make decisions based on emamectin benzoate or azadirachtin or even imidacloprid or dimethyfuran. There are pluses and minuses for every single one of those chemicals. Then you gotta kind of just understand it. And if you don't do a lot of research, you're not gonna make a good decision. Either way, whether to apply it or not apply it. That's pretty much how the pesticide world works, is that you hear a lot of stuff and you hear a lot of things about everything killing everything, and generally that's gonna be not true.
I would just think there's a difference, though, because there are pesticides that are registered in Maine that are dangerous for anybody to breathe in. I accidentally got sprayed by someone and pesticide company was fine for doing that because it's not harmless for humans. It does seem to me that it's overgeneralizing, but it's playing in our yards and that sort of thing. They need to know differences and what the purposes are. And then it would be helpful to have more information on the Project Canopy website or the Forest Service website that points those things out.
This insecticide guide right here goes through everything. You just ask for resources on the website.
So what you're talking about is it's a non-labeled application. So it all is based on whether or not it's used according to the label direction, whether you're a commercial applicator or a homeowner. If you don't read the whole label and follow that label to a T, then you're going beyond what the EPA has allowed for use. If you stay within that label and you do it according to the label directions, and you're not applying to people around or having physical drift goes on to other people, then that's gonna have very minimal risk. If you do things the wrong way, you spray it up in the air and it goes all over the place and it hits people, that's unacceptable risk. If you're doing injection treatment, there isn't any of that there. If there are leaves that fall, yes, there's going to be, any one of these 4 applications that occur, there may be residue in the leaves. And yeah, there might be some exposure, but that is something that is also considered when they do the registration. They're looking at all modes of potential, ways of getting involved with it. They're also even looking at whole families of chemicals and how you get exposed to them from drinking water, from spray drift, from everything, from the food that you eat. And that's all factored into the decision as to whether or not to allow a product to be used. There's a lot more that goes into it than you really understand. And having worked with this for many years and read, volumes and volumes of stuff on all these products, I've got kids, I've got grandkids. I'm not worried about emamectin benzoate or, all 4 of those chemicals. It's just, you have to kind of decide for yourself.
You were next, man. Yep, out of fairness to everybody. So question here is, how long can you keep trees alive through insecticide treatment?
Huge and healthy.
If they're huge and healthy, I mean, the concept is, once you go the insecticide treatment route, you're making a commitment, either short term, if your goal is again, to keep a tree in good shape while you, gather resources for removals or stuff like that. You can keep them alive into perpetuity, if that's your goal. If you have that beautiful shade tree that sits over your house, that makes your whole property, you can treat it as long as you're willing to invest in it. And I mean, hopefully, products that are even more effective or, costs will come down for that stuff. That's hard to say, but, if that's your priority is to keep that tree alive, you can keep treating. I don't think anything's been treated so long now that they've seen can't keep doing it. That would be an interesting research question. But again, we're only, 2002 Michigan is the first detection. So we're only a couple decades into this whole thing, and we're going to learn a lot over lifetimes. But yeah, so you were.
Discussion, we need to save it for the end though.
Is there another presentation?
Yeah, we
Oh,
have
crap.
another presentation.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mike.
No.
We have time here at the end, but I want to be respectful. We have the City of Belfast working group that has prepared some information. They're going to be a nice local resource for those of you here in Belfast.
We can bring you slides.
Together some information to actually identify some apps ahead of time before you even had to be identified. You might be introducing yourselves too.
Yep. I'm Carol Harwig. I am a working arborist. I'm a certified arborist internationally, and working with the city as I just became a tree warden. And I'm the chairman of the tree working group, which did the inventory of the city.
Hi, my name is April Daly Cagnon. I have been a certified master gardener for 16 years and have a small garden maintenance business here in Maine. I've been doing garden maintenance for 16 years, master gardener. I'm also part of the tree working group. So to understand what that is, tree working group is a group of local citizens, including environmental scientists, soil scientists, tech people, and just average people who are interested about trees in the Belfast area being cared and maintained for. So that group got together in 2023 and formally organized. And in the next year, within the next year, they applied for a canopy grant and got funding to do an inventory of the trees and all of the rights of way throughout the whole city of Belfast. And that inventory was completed this year. We inventoried more than 60,000 trees. They were all entered into a database. They were entered into an iTree database, so they all have been mapped. And they all have been measured and quantified as far as the health of the trees in Belfast, what species they are, their size, and whether like there's an age significance or for some reason they have a significance. Unhealthy trees were tagged as far as in the database, as far as whether they needed to come down or not. Most of those decisions were made by Carol, who's a certified arborist, so she evaluated the trees and decided yes or no. And that's what she does for the city of Belfast now.
Wow.
So, yeah, 60,000 trees. In that inventory, about 60% of the street trees in Belfast are either ash trees or the invasive Norway maple trees. So 60% of the trees in the right of ways through the city of Belfast are either some form of ash tree or Norway maple trees. That's a huge percentage. Even if you assume that Norway maples have a greater percentage, you're still looking at a 25% of the street trees are ash trees.
Right.
And a lot of them are either very small stands of very small ash, or large ash that are open. So this was one of the reasons that the tree working group got together. So we could
Get to the microphone.
Sorry.
It's really hard to hear what you're missing.
So one of the reasons that this tree working group got together is that we foresaw that the emerald ash borer was going to get here. It was already in Maine, and we wanted to try and take a look at how we could affect it. My personal experience is that I lived in Massachusetts and Worcester County during the Asian longhorn beetle situation. So Asian longhorn beetles were identified in Worcester County in Maine, eventually affecting 6 townships, cities or townships in Maine, and more than 40,000 trees were removed in a very short period of time. In Massachusetts. So more than 40,000 trees in a heavily wooded area, forested area, and those were trees on every property. The difference between emerald ash borer and Asian longhorn beetle is Asian longhorn beetle affects many species of trees. Emerald ash borer is only affecting ash trees. So we're not going to lose, well, we may lose 40,000 trees throughout Maine, maybe we already have, but we'll still have a diversity of species. But in the city of Belfast, our species diversity is much, much lower. So our objectives were to have a certified arborist as a tree warden for the city of Belfast, and that has been accomplished now through the city's understanding of what we did. Also, we wanted to have a tree commission for the city of Belfast, where decisions about tree planting, tree health, and going forward with the tree canopy can be made on a bigger scale in advance. And then also currently there is a tree ordinance in Belfast, but it has no teeth. So anybody can take down any tree, and it costs the person who takes it down, whether they got permission or not, only $25 if they don't do it right. So if the city owns the tree, you have to get permission from the city in order to take the tree down. If you don't get permission and you take down a legacy tree, a tree that's 100 years old, it only costs you $25, where the loss to the city is a lot more. In many, many different ways. So those are still things that are on our agenda moving forward for the tree commission and where we're going. Right now, we're focused on the emerald ash borer. So what does that mean? That means that we have made the iTree databases available to the city already. So they know where the trees that we have marked are. They know what the percentage of their ash trees are, and they have access to that database continuously. Which is a great tool for them to have ahead of what has already occurred here. The next step is to educate the public about what to do. We don't want people to panic and say, let's just take out all the ash trees. That's not going to be the way to go forward. So we're going to start educating people on how to identify what your ash trees are, how to identify the emerald ash borer, and how to make the right decisions. The next thing that really was a big focus for me coming out of Worcester, and what I mostly participated in, is making decisions about what to plant as your canopy moving forward. It has to be a diverse species. It has to be species that will do well here and do well. If they're street trees, you have to choose trees that will do well as street trees. So that is our goal going forward, is to do all of that education for the city of Belfast. So, and they're already, so currently there's a list on the Belfast Garden Club website, including trees, choosing the right trees, and please, trees that you recommend to plant, whether it's on your property and based on the guidelines, you know, as far as, you know, shade, sun, is it a street tree, is it a tree in your yard, whatever it is. There are also links on our website to the Maine Forestry Service and any of the state information that is that you might need to understand what's happening with emerald ash borer.
Right, I think she's really summed up what our message is. I would just emphasize, do not panic. Don't just start cutting trees down. Do make sure, you know, do some research, do your homework. There's apps, iNaturalist, Picture This can tell you what your tree is. There is a service out of iTree, which is developed by the U.S. Forest Service, called My Tree, that will help you assess the impact of your tree. And we're talking about energy, stormwater, you know, light, shade, all of that kind of stuff. And we'll be putting together some informational classes for residents. Our next big step, as she said, is really going to be educating the residents, so they know, be a resource for them. Often we would refer them to you, to the Maine State, because you have the entomologists and that information, but we will serve as much as we can as the intermediaries in education. Thank you for giving us a forum.
A question. Has the city started creating a plan like she was outlining earlier?
No, but I just got an email this morning that have me meet with the city manager and the Department of Public Works manager, Kim Faulkner, and myself, and I guess the assistant city manager, so that will definitely be part of the conversation.
We have time for one more question for Belfast Board.
So what percentage of the 60,000 community trees are ash? And did I understand you to say that all of the community trees that are ash are going to be dead anyway? That's what I heard you say.
No, I'm saying that pretty much the largest of the trees are probably going to die. That's almost a guarantee.
But is that because they're infected?
No.
Or you guys are just
No.
saying they're gonna die?
No, I mean, pretty much everybody here has said the trees are going to die, because that's what we see has already happened in areas infested with emerald ash borer, is the majority of your ash trees are going to die. So how do you affect that? By treating.
Yeah.
So if you do nothing, your ash trees, the majority of your ash trees are going to die. Is there a way to prevent that? Are there going to be some that will develop resistance? There are studies that show, and everything that's happened in the other states where this has occurred shows us that there are some trees that will have some level of resistance to emerald ash borer. Most of those trees, the majority of those trees, are not your very large ash trees. And the younger a tree is, when it's exposed to something like that, the more likely it is to develop a resistance to that same thing.
And also, so this is also an opportunity for you to decide if you have a tree, an ash tree that you really value, are you going to go ahead and do the treatment on one of the injectables, for example? Do we get the percentage of the community trees that are ash?
So again, remember that, so here's the thing about our iTree database is that our technology person who developed it is under his own personal company. So we can't give you access to that database, but we can pull the data out of it. And we pulled the 60% our ash and Norway maple out because we were having discussions along the lines of what to do with the city.
We can match, and then it's.
Yes.
There's one thing.
You got it. Oh, it's not about keeping it secret. It's the. Yeah, so there's a printout on the table that shows the map of ash trees in the city rights of way. We're not trying to keep it secret. It's just that when you're talking about this data, 60,000 trees, you're talking about a book. And all of the information in it. So will that be information be made available to you? Absolutely. But when we tell you the percentage, it's not going to change what you might do on your own property or what the city does on their property. The city's going to go based on the planning and the decisions that you make to go forward.
Also, they're going according to the decisions of the entomologist and the arborist.
Okay.
Just.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Discussion, but we can save it. We've got just one more to go here.
Yes, and I'm quick, so you can forget these.
Thank you, Amy. So just very quickly, I just wanted to pop back onto this slide to just talk about resources that are available. I mean, we talked about all the stuff that you need to do. Well, it takes money to do it, right? And it takes information and education. So again, I mentioned that we do have a sample plan up on the website. It needs to be updated, but that is available, and we'll hopefully get that updated, and we can do that quickly and put it back, get a new one up there. We've got the homeowner's guide to saving high value ash, a readiness checklist for communities. Of course, we've got our licensed arborists and pesticide applicators lists. We have some refined lists, particularly for pesticide applicators on the EAB page that refer to companies that are willing to do treatments for brown-tailed moth and EAB. Guidelines for wood waste handling, guidance for forest landowners, lots of people, our best resource, all the people that are here in this room, as well as many others, your district foresters across the state. We've got folks who are experts in water management on unforested sites, people who are studying things like climate impacts of EAB, our stewardship forester. All of us are resources. We all do educational events. Keep your eyes on some of those lists that have been referred to. If you're not signed up for like our monthly pest updates in the summertime months, awesome. Loads of information there. Get signed up for those. And then most importantly, what you want to know about is grants, of course. So Project Canopy does have grants. Just put the announcement out at the beginning of this week. So it is up on our website, and we're actively promoting those grants right now. We have 3 categories, as Alyssa mentioned at the beginning: planning and education, planting and maintenance, and then last year, this will be available for those communities that are eligible. We do have what we're calling the Urban Community Forestry Restoration Grants this year. So those are Inflation Reduction Act funded supported grants for disadvantaged communities across the state. So all of the resources for those grants are up and available on the website. We have a training program that you can watch prior to application if you have any questions. And of course, again, myself, your field foresters are all resources if you have questions as you're navigating that process. We do try to make it as simple as possible, particularly for those planting and education planting and maintenance grants. It's a 1-page application. You have to do, some add-ons to describe what you're doing, but we try to keep it pretty simple to keep it accessible for those communities that don't have the capacity to do a lot of grant applications, which is almost every community in the state of Maine. And those are, we can fund a wide range of EAB management within those grants. We can fund hiring consultants to do these plans, to do the inventories, as you've heard about from Belfast and Camden. They hired consultants to do that work for them and to develop those plans. Grants can support that. Grants can also support some of the implementation of those outlined objectives, including doing things like removals and replanting, as well as treatment. It's not gonna get you a long way. The grant limitations are relatively small for planting and maintenance. It's a $15,000 cap that has to be matched dollar for dollar, but that dollar for dollar match can be in kind. So you don't have to have any actual real money that goes into it. It can be, you know, the resources that you have there locally and your public works staff doing that work for you. You know, administrative staff, your volunteer community that's helping can all contribute to what your match is in those grants. Planning and education grants, that's where you would apply for doing an inventory and a management plan. And if your community is eligible, you can apply for those larger sums in the Inflation Reduction Act funds. Those limits go up to $200,000. You can get a lot of work done there. And we do have a number of communities in the state of Maine that applied for and received funds to do management plans and begin some of that work in the last round of those funds. So any questions there before we wrap it up for questions?
So the other thing that you can sign up for on any of the state websites is the Gov delivery system. So at the bottom of the page, you'll find where it says email/text updates. You can get on that system, put in your email, and you can choose all kinds of things, including EAD updates that we send out from our office, but also, you know, all kinds of different topics there that you might be interested in. So that's one place to stay up to date on things where, you know, we would be sending updates about changes in the different quarantines that we have, or where EAD has been found, or anything like that.
Yeah, pretty much everything we share now. That's how we get that out the door. We used to have paper printouts we get sent out in the mail, but you know, those websites are listed there. That top one is a national website, but maine.gov/EAB is the go-to place for Maine-specific information. And then of course, there's my information, and let's open it up to all of the presenters for.
We have until 12:15 for questions. We'll need to get it cleaned up here. Reminder, keep the tone respectful. We have some volunteers here. Let's be nice to our tree board volunteers. But we do need to, before anything else, give a round of applause for Belfast Park.
Yeah, awesome venue. Thank you. So I think there were some questions.
Yeah, we're good.
So I just thought I'd offer up the concern that was brought up earlier about the heavy benzoate engagement. That's a question I've been asked by customers several times. So I reached out to our lab and they made me aware, maybe there's an opportunity to put a link on the website. It's either the University of Michigan or Michigan State, to study on that specific issue. And they found that there was essentially, for all intents and purposes, negligible amounts of benzoate in the abscise leaves by the time they came down in the fall. So that their conclusion was there was essentially no concern. They found either no product or the amounts that they found were so negligible that they would metabolize very quickly. That's just on that product, but.
Yeah, great. And just a reminder, with any of the treatments that Mike had on that spreadsheet, proper PPE is essential, even for organic treatments. I mean, neem oil's been gotta wear proper PPE with organic and with our regular insecticides. And if it's something that is only available to our applicators, don't try and get it other ways and apply it yourself. There's a reason that a professional needs to do it.
Speaking of applicators, for private folks, you know, also on our websites, we have a master list of licensed pesticide applicators and arborists. You know, it's a PDF of everybody that works in a certain area. So you look up your town or county, you know, there's all your contact information, so you can make calls if you need to do that. So we don't, you know, provide local recommendations per se, but we keep that master catalog. So that's all online as well. We're free to use that. I think you can get in touch with either a licensed pesticide applicator or an arborist, and a lot of people are both.
Right, and only hire a licensed arborist. That's one thing that my program does, the licensed arborist. So, and a licensed arborist is not licensed to apply pesticides. It's a separate license that they have to have. They need to have a master pesticide applicator, license in their company. And then whoever does the application needs to be licensed as a commercial pesticide applicator. Can't do it as a private applicator, can't do it as, one of our lower level, types of licenses. And again, only hire licensed arborists. There's a big problem with that, nowadays. There's lots of people out there saying that they can cut your trees down and they'll do it for cheaper because they don't have insurance. So always make sure that whoever you're gonna hire, can show you that they have insurance, and especially workers' comp insurance, because if they, get injured on your property, you're stuck with the bill. So make sure you understand that before you hire someone to take down a tree. And there's gonna be a lot of trees that are gonna have to come down, because this insect, it kills trees. And, if they're not treated, they're gonna die, most likely. We may have some that are, somewhat resistant, but that's built into their, existing genetics, and if it's not there, it's not there. The tree's gonna, probably succumb.
There's point two, make sure you have a contract with any arborist or forester that you use for
Right.
anything, just to cover your bases. License, insured, contract. Rebates, pickups. Yeah, question back here.
Yeah, I don't actually have a question. I just want to make a statement that the tree working group is tree called 2A. It's under the Belfast Garden Club. It was started by us. If you want information about 2A, it's on the Belfast Garden Club website. If you want a map of the ash trees that we found when we did the survey, it's on the front and it's also on the website. Any other trees we found, they're only in the city's rights of way. So if you have ash on your own properties, you have to find them yourself. So our survey is not secret, it's completely available. What we don't know is whether you have ash on your own property. What we know is where the ash are in the city streets, on the city streets, in the rights of way. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any model contracts available for, for cities to use to enter into?
We can find something. I'm not thinking that we have anything currently up on our website, but we do have model contracts. We're working with a logger and a forester, so that is a great suggestion. I'll take that back.
One of the things we encourage too, the whole point of these municipal meetings, we're obviously having a focus group here today, but for our folks online, the idea is to get the municipalities to kind of talk to one another when they're dealing with this, because there's a lot of other places in Maine that have already dealt with this for better, for worse, so learn from their experiences, call their town managers, talk with these people, get some tips and advice and stuff. It's a big lift. So, yeah, certainly Southern Maine, some municipalities that have dealt with the problem. And then, like Bangor is a great recent example of, it's close, they're doing something really proactive up there, they've got a plan in place. So, yeah, those are really the valuable things versus, what we tell you or seeing some of these things that people are actually doing or have, lived through, and the mistakes that have been made, so you can try to avoid them for your own municipality.
Name a couple of municipalities that have been doing treatment for a couple of years.
Treat actual ejections.
Yeah, that will have already been in a contract and figured out what they should have done before.
The city of Portland has been treating for several years now, and the town of Yarmouth are two that come top of mind.
Bangor,
Had Bangor started treating.
Yep.
Also, Kennebunk. Is Kennebunk country?
Very likely, they have a very engaged program. So yeah, I'm not aware that they are specifically for EAB. I know they do Dutch elm disease treatment still, so I suspect.
Well, the other thing towns need to consider is replacements and not make the same mistake that seems to get repeated, where you replace your elms with all ash. Even like they did on the University of Maine campus, for those of you that went there as I did, and they replaced their elms with green ash, which know what's gonna happen there now. But, make sure that we're putting in a diversity of species and ideally probably more natives than non-natives, but the choices are limited in terms of what natives you can use these days, even, beach is now under attack as well. And so, we have to think about all those things when we make decisions on how to replace these trees. And of course, making sure that somebody doesn't slip in an invasive tree or something like that. That's probably legal, which isn't legal to sell in the state, it hasn't been since 2018.
Yeah, and to pony on to that too, thinking not just about different species, but different genera of trees.
Yeah.
Creating a wide range of different genera. Don't just plant red maple and sugar maple, but
Right.
making sure you're creating maples and birches.
Great point, yeah.
And there are guidelines as to how diverse your canopy should be. And I can't remember what the rules are.
10, 20, 30,
Yeah.
general guideline, so no more than 10% of species, no more than 20% of a certain genera, no more than 30% of a certain families.
Plan to protect the ash trees that are used by the emergency people to save basic trees. Is there any plan in place to protect those ash trees?
Tyler is the forester with the Wabanaki, and he's doing some studies on black brown ash, and resistance, and, I think it's calling convention, it's more susceptible than our other ash species. I'm not sure exactly what their studies are showing right now, or if they put that data together, but that's something that they're working on.
They're trying to identify brown ash throughout the state, if anyone has them, right now?
They are, yes, yeah, I know that they should have early to talk more about it, but we have a great collaborative relationship with them, and it's called Ash. Oh, God.
Collaboration across Wabanaki. Yeah, so there's a huge campaign and they're at the helm of it and they're doing awesome stuff and yeah, we work with them a lot. So, yeah, they're.
Also doing seed collection to maintain genetic stock and working with your input and research. Yeah.
I think that's a collaborative effort with Maine as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a-
Yeah, so everybody is players.
And it extends beyond.
Yeah.
So for those not aware, Nancy asked the question about the basket making ash. And from what I understand, it's just black ash that's used for the basket making, and it's the most susceptible to EAB. So there is cultural significance to that species that we're losing. I think it's also part of the Wabanaki creation story too, so there's some major cultural impacts. So Tyler Everett, forester with Wabanaki, is working on that. A lot of great questions and discussion today. I think we have time for a couple more, but if something comes to you later, please feel free to send me an email with any questions or give me a call, and I can direct you to any of the next folks that presented here today. I'm a really good person on track for triage.
Yeah, I want to thank Alyssa for pulling this together. For those of you, we didn't actually really mention, but we do regular public outreach calls on this topic. We call them quarterly, but I think we only actually do them 3 times a year. But they typically are online. Very rarely do we do these in person programs, but I'm really glad that Alyssa got us to take this one on the road and get you all here. I think it gives us a great opportunity to have some better in-depth discussion. But just know that that is available, and those call notices do go out on the EAB listserv, as well as many of our other listservs too. So feel free anytime to sign up for those. I expect the next one will probably be in December. We don't have speakers lined up for that yet, but we often do have guest speakers that are from outside of our entities and do a deep dive into some of these topics that we have a lot of questions on. So
Thank you.
I would like to